For more on this, I want to bring in Carrie Severino now. She's the president of the Judicial Crisis Network and the co-author of Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. Carrie, good to have you back with us.
Great to be here.
So Joe Biden announces a three-part plan today, calling for a constitutional amendment to go after presidents of the United States, namely Trump. That's who he wants to go after. He wants to appoint a justice every 2 years, presidents can, and then give them 18-year term limits. And then he wants to impose new ethical standards on the Supreme Court. What do you make of these proposals?
Look, all of this is such clear partisan politics. None of it has to do with ethics on the court. Well, obviously, we know that trying to undo the Supreme Court decision on Trump has nothing to do with that. What's going on here is the Democrats and Joe Biden, who's happy to do whatever he can to try to revive people's opinion of him, they're so frustrated that they have a court that is not willing to just go with whatever their policy proposal of the day is, that they're lashing out. They're trying to undercut the Supreme Court's actual decision. They're trying to pack the court. The term limit proposal is really just, it's court packing in a tuxedo. It's really just an attempt to pack the court through a slightly different means. Leave aside the fact that obviously none of this is something that the current Congress is going to consider passing. Term limits is something that no Congress can constitutionally pass because it's in the Constitution. All of this just shows, their agenda is utterly at odds with the Constitution itself. That's their problem. The problem isn't really with the court; it's that they're frustrated by the Constitution itself.
The term that we just completed with the Supreme Court involved a lot of giving power back to the people, especially overturning things like the Chevron decision, and saying that we shouldn't concentrate so much power in the federal government. We shouldn't allow the agencies to just make up laws. The people's representatives actually have to write the laws. So when Biden says in this op-ed today, or whoever wrote it for him, that, quote, we can and must strengthen the guardrails of democracy, he must view giving the federal government more power as, quote, democracy.
Look, I do not think that word means what you think it means. They just use the word democracy for whatever they want to do, just like they're going to say, we have to subvert the voting process to get the president we want in defense of democracy. Like, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
Just like this is not about democracy. None of this is what is actually attempting what they're saying. If they were really concerned about ethics, and they would actually be looking to themselves. The people who are the most corrupt, who are getting more kickbacks than anyone else, are the very members of Congress who are proposing these kinds of things. If they really were interested, they would be happy to pass a across-the-board ethics guideline saying, okay, no one gets to ride in a private jet. No one gets to have a trip that someone else is paying for. But the congressmen want that for themselves.
Yes.
They just don't want to do it if it means a justice that they disagree with is going to do it. Well, you notice they're only looking at term limits after their octa and nonagenarian justices have left the court. So we had a 95-year-old justice who was serving and was liberal. No one is worried. Now suddenly, when it's Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, they're the eldest members of the court, we need term limits. Come on, folks. We know what the deal is.
Yeah, and they have a special contempt for Justice Thomas and Justice Alito because they adhere to the Constitution, the vision of the founders, and making sure that the people's power is maintained, not threatened by the government. So as a result, they need to go. So they've launched all of these specious attacks, especially at those two men and their spouses, claiming that they have some sort of ethical lapses when everything they've done has been above board. And they've, in fact, shared everything they possibly should when it comes to their relationships with other people, including rich people. And yet the left has really demonized them, haven't they, Carrie?
Well, absolutely. And, it's really telling because tell me which decision it is that Justice Alito or Justice Thomas has voted in a surprising way. You're like, well, that's weird. Why would he do that? Oh, it must be because he's trying to curry favor with someone. Zero. It's just never happened. I mean, these guys are actually behaving on the court the same way everyone who was voting on their nominations knew they were going to be behaving. That's why Joe Biden voted against them, right? It's so absurd to even suggest, and I don't think they can even with a straight face suggest that somehow either of these men has changed their votes based on any, having a friend, that happens to own a plane or something.
Right.
That's absurd. And so that's why they're not really even talking about it. They're trying to just piece together things and raised eyebrows and make it look like an ethics violation, when in fact, no, they've followed the rules that are laid down for every other judge and justice. They just want to change the rules until they can impact the conservative justice and try to get them off the important cases.
They just bang the scandal drum until people believe it, for sure. And when it comes to the other people in Washington, you're right. I mean, corruption is definitely everywhere. Conflict of interest definitely everywhere. President Biden himself, his family's taken untold sums of money from foreign interests, and which has been the subject, of course, of a gigantic impeachment inquiry into the Bidens. He's pretending like that's not an issue at all. I mean, just a very simple thing, Carrie Severino. We don't even know who visits him in Delaware. The White House doesn't even provide information about who visits the president when he's away for 40% of his presidency in Delaware. We're not entitled to that information, apparently. So the idea that he's accusing others of ethical lapses is laughable.
I mean, this whole thing is such you can't parody it. It's kind of like AOC is the one who says we should start impeaching justices for ethical lapses. I'm like, oh my gosh, this woman has been investigated for all these. She's the least serious member of Congress, and this is your standard bearer. So yeah, having Joe Biden out there trying to talk about ethics and corruption is really rich.
Let me ask you about this amendment that he's proposing. He's proposing a constitutional amendment called the "No One Is the Above the Law" amendment, and here's how it's described. Quote, "It would make clear that there is no immunity for crimes a former president committed while in office. I share our founders' belief that the president's power is limited, not absolute. We are a nation of laws, not of kings or dictators." Now, let me just pull back and talk about the case he's referencing. The United States Supreme Court concluded, quite obviously, that the Biden administration was abusing its power by prosecuting Trump, his political opponent. And they rendered a judgment to that effect, and they sent it back to the lower courts, and they said it's important that you recognize that a president's official acts do have immunity. So you have to make some distinctions here between what acts you think were official and what acts you think were not official. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is, that case is a law, is a rule rather, that's going to be applying even-handedly to all presidents, including President Biden. And you know what? I think he probably should be grateful. The climate of lawfare that we live in right now, he's not someone who will fare very well if that is being weaponized against him as well, because we all know that the long list of concerns people might have in lawsuits that could be brought by a later administration. This is the kind of ruling that ties a future second-term President Trump's hands every bit as much as it does Joe Biden. So
yes.
That's why, if he really thought, like, look, we know that there's just no way in the short term he's going to be able to get, even if there were the will to do so, a constitutional amendment is a heavy lift, and it should be. We don't want to amend our founding documents lightly. But I think if he really thought that were a real likelihood to be passed, he might think twice about it, because I think at the end of the day that court ruling, which they realized was not just about Trump. It's about setting the standard that's going to apply to every president. Right. I think he's going to want that one to apply to himself as well.
But the concept of immunity for a president of the United States, long understood in the civil case, I mean, the idea that presidents should be free from having to deal with lawsuits for all of their official actions, it got extended in this Supreme Court decision. They concluded that, well, criminal actions should be treated the same way. That you shouldn't take criminal actions against a president. That's an important principle, isn't it, for the president of the United States to be able to act without those types of restrictions placed upon his office?
Well, sure, because the president, if you thought that someone's going to be just going after you, trying to nitpick every decision you made as a president, it really ties your hands. It makes it much harder to have the freedom. And so the court was balanced. They didn't say, much opposed to what you hear people talking in the media. They didn't say presidents are above the law. They said very clearly the opposite. They said, there are certain things that are the core presidential decisions, like granting a pardon. The president doesn't have standards in the Constitution that he's only allowed to grant certain pardons. He's allowed to do that. You can't have people trying to dive into his motivations on things, because they're just going to destroy this president's ability to function, right? So if it's a core presidential function, they actually are going to get the benefit of the doubt and say, no, you can't create a criminal offense out of this. But there's actually a whole large range of things that might be official action. I mean, think of the SEAL Team 6 example that was in one of the dissents saying, oh, he could order SEAL Team 6 to kill his political opponents. Well, okay, that might be an official action, but the court didn't say all official actions are fair game as well. They said at that point, the court or the government trying to bring the lawsuit then has to show that it's not going to impede the president's ability to carry out his office if we did make that criminal. And you know what? I think everyone can agree our presidents can still function if they're not allowed to order political assassinations of their opponents. So seems to me that would be clearly, the president doesn't get immunity from this. So there's the huge range of things. It's still not even covered. He just is relying on, the way the media has spun this. People get concerned about because the picture they're painting is a frightening one where presidents are truly above the law.
And we've become so accustomed to Congress abdicating its responsibility in everything from actually creating laws. They cede it all to the agencies, to using the impeachment clause of the Constitution. If a president is that out of control, the founders literally built in a way to handle that situation.
Exactly. And that's what the impeachment power is for, which doesn't have to, by the way, show all of those things. You wouldn't have to go and say, well, is this part of his central authority? If they could impeach him if there was a high crime and misdemeanor committed regarding one of his core presidential powers. That is the default constitutional check on a president, is the impeachment.
Finally, Carrie, in your assessment, how much has the left damaged the institution of the United States Supreme Court in constantly beating that drum of saying that people shouldn't trust the court at all, including in some of the very wise and prudent decisions they've been making?
Yeah, I think this is a real tragedy, the level to which the Supreme Court as an institution has become collateral damage in all of these fights over various policy issues, which they're not even enforced with deciding. But when the left realized that they can't strong arm the court into doing their will, then they just decided, if you can't beat them, destroy them. And that's kind of what they're doing is like, hey, if we can't use this institution to work our will, which for a lot of American history, unfortunately, a lot of this last century, they were able to achieve. Since they're not able to do that, I think they just said, okay, well, we're gonna try to destroy it then, and that has been a real tragedy. You've got American people losing confidence in maybe the only remotely functional branch of government we have right now, and that's very sad.
It definitely is. Carrie Severino with the Judicial Crisis Network. Always nice to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time today.